I was introduced as an academic, and that used to be the case, but I now have become a hybrid academic and have become a practitioner. But I'm still very interested in studying the role of technologies in our society, and specifically in socio-political spaces. So I will also present you a little bit of a hybrid perspective on crowdsourcing. I wear multiple hats. I represent, I'm from InnovaBridge Foundation, which is a Swiss-based foundation. And in my past life, I was an academic at the European University Institute studying basically the very different aspects of e-democracy, how actually MEPs were using online and offline methods of connecting to their constituencies. Also e-consultations, the early phases of EU using e-consultation mechanisms, what was their impact, what was their value. And then I was also involved in various EU participatory projects like the Europolis and Tomorrow's Europe, which were the first deliberative polling tools. And as it was stated by previous speakers, there's already a lot of tools out there. But what is interesting is to ask also the bigger questions. One thing is the tools, but actually why? Why? And crowdsourcing particularly is becoming a tool, it's a reaction to reality. The reality being is technology is here to stay. It is permeating our lives in every aspect, from daily encounters to political aspects. Big data and data itself is going to explode on us. It's already here, but it's coming in ways that are unimaginable. In the past 4 years, we have produced more data than we have ever before that. So actually in the past year, we have produced as much data as we have produced before that. And we're continually in real time producing data as we speak in this room. So this is coming, and the tools that we create to manage this reality is going to be the interesting factor, and therefore I really, really welcome this conference or this session to talk about this and to ask the bigger questions. Also the speed of things. The technology is doing certain things and we don't understand them fully, what it is, how it is actually impacting us. But the rapid innovation with new tools coming on, and that's something I would like also throughout this presentation for us to think about. Tools, so what? It's very exciting to jump on the bandwagon of another tool and start using it, but always to embed it in a bigger question. And also netizens. This is our new reality. We have a lot of tools at our disposal and we can do a lot of different interesting things and potentially sometimes less interesting things. So these are the reality, and it is transforming the way we govern, the way we do things. And putting crowdsourcing at the center. As I said, there are a lot of tools out there, but looking at crowdsourcing, what are some of the opportunities? It is actually a mechanism to tap into our collective intelligence. Crowdsourcing by default assumes that each of us have a story to tell and are worthy of an input into a collective space, be it political, be it social, be it technical, be it sectoral, as I will show you some example of some crowdsourcing tools being used in reality. It's also a new way of volunteering. It's very interesting to see why people engage in crowdsourcing. There's different perspective, there's still research is ongoing, it's very fresh. But it's a way of neo-volunteering, in fact, because a lot of people don't get compensation for it apart from participation. So it's interesting for us to ask, why do we do things? And then to capitalize on that also when we design tools in the future. It also provides a tool for creating flexible communities. We are now, there's a lot of kind of research out there on the impact of technology, and the fact that is also, in some sense, we are creating more volume of communication. The question is, are we doing more quality communication? What are we communicating? How are we communicating? And what is the net effect of that? And also, we are becoming more fragmented, having more things at our disposal. We're becoming more educated. We want things, we demand things, and we do more stuff. And crowdsourcing actually mimics where we are kind of developing as a society, that we are actually becoming shoppers. Before it was very top-down driven. You know, a government would be sort of dictating. The way we participate was usually elections. Now, between two election points, there is much more interest and also tool that we are creating to come in to the political game. At the same time, as was expressed, we see there is lower voter turnout, people are less interested, and people are not always interested in participating, even though the tools and opportunities are there. One thing is that there's maybe too much of it, maybe just too much of it. And therefore, actually, crowdsourcing is seen in a positive sense as one way for people to tap in at sort of salient issues that are really important to me. Let's say I'm an ecological buff. I like ecology, but I don't necessarily care about healthcare, or less so, or on my sort of priorities ranking, it's less important. So I can kind of hop in and hop out of different tools, and I can use tools at different times. And I will come back to that, is the combination of tools. It can be cost effective, because we are actually getting a lot of collective intelligence at one point. So this is an immense, immense asset, where before one would have to hire experts. Now we actually have experts at one point in a community setting, putting in on a voluntary basis that input. It's a huge, huge energy aspect. It catalyzes innovation and co-creation of knowledge. This is something where the future is going, is to create knowledge, data. We're becoming more cerebral, more analytical, more educated. Hence, we are producing more knowledge and are interested in more knowledge. Crowdsourcing is one way of doing so. Another thing is democratizing the political game, because it's starting to invest and believe in a priori into horizontal relationship rather than in top-down relationships. In terms of challenges, there are also challenges. One thing is recruitment. A lot of crowdsourcing sort of platforms are having challenges with recruiting. How do you get the crowd? We will build them, they will come, does not always work. Just because we create a platform does not mean that crowds will be storming the platform, contributing constructive inputs. There's also the question of impact, the quality of inputs that one gets through crowdsourcing. And also the perpetual question in participatory kind of tools is the self-selection bias. We're always hoping that if we create another tool, participatory tool, that we're going to engage more people. It's kind of a bias for those making those tools, that we're going to increase engagement. The question always is, do we really? Or are just the same types of people participating just with a different tool? So it's very important when designing crowdsourcing platforms or any kind of participatory tools to think about and study the actual impact. Who is the user? Who is participating? And then ensure that there is social inclusion factors factored in. That you reach out to, as I will say later, there's ways to architect tools where you could actually increase or ensure social inclusion. Too many tools. Do we maybe have too many tools? That actually our collective, let's say, participatory capital is becoming fragmented. As in Switzerland, if you look at Swiss referenda and how many people are turning out, it's actually a very low number. But that because they have them so frequently, they have them on a let's say 4 or 5 times a year. So, you know, this is a question, is quantity versus quality, one time versus several times. And also, crowdsourcing have various phases, as I will show you some examples. There's hackathons, data jams, there's civic hacks, competitions, surveys. These are all different types of crowdsourcing. Even e-consultations are a form of crowdsourcing. So again, it's a new label that's becoming very sort of popular. But it's also to existing tools, but certainly there are some new tools that we're adding to the range. Sustainability is another question. You can build the platforms, but a lot of crowdsourcing platforms are experiencing how do you sustain it? And maybe sometimes it's okay that a platform is there for a short period of time. Again, the question is of design. Why do you want to do something, and to what purpose and to what effect? Now, some examples of crowdsourcing. I currently work in Ukraine. I am the Swiss-funded advisor to the Ukrainian government, as well as the Swiss are having a fairly big program on e-governance for accountability and participation in Ukraine. As you know, in 2014, there was a fairly significant political shake-up in Ukraine, and actually technology played a huge role in that. They had a Maidan, where basically people gathered for the revolution to overthrow the government at the time. But what was fascinating, that the whole, just like in Arab Spring, was mobilized through a civic platform, online platform. Not only that, they created an alternative media channel because they did not trust the conventional media channels. So actually citizens crowdsourced and created an online or revolutionary platform where they, anything from asking each other where they're meeting, where they're dropping off medicine, anything that had to do with the offline Maidan, with the real-time Maidan, was done also online. They were also communicating with the diaspora outside in the world. Again, they were not trusting the formal media that was state-controlled. So they found an alternative channel to communicate and function in a revolutionary setting. Completely crowdsourcing. Amazing civic energy that was created. Clearly also had some negative aspects of it. What it was also very interesting, that it actually changed political culture. The Maidan and the online use of the platform during the revolution now changed the way socially networked. Social networks have risen to unprecedented heights. People use social networks for everything. And Ukrainians now told me that this was not the case before. So it's interesting how one event can actually also change, an offline event can change an online way, and also political culture with new technologies. What is a challenge now is how do you sustain that momentum in spite of the tools, in spite of new realities are hitting Ukraine, and how do you sustain that? So, as one of my conclusions, I will come, and actually, it's a cross-cutting theme that I would say not to ever disassociate the offline with the online. Just because it's technology doesn't mean that it's very, very intricately connected to the face-to-face contact and what we do in everyday life. The second example is the sectoral. It's Code for Health. This is a very interesting, something along the line of what Angelina was saying, trying to identify sectoral approaches, which are usually very good entry points because they're issue specific. You tend to but they do tend to attract different types of crowds, which is experts or people tied to specific themes. So in this case, it's health professionals, it's users, so it's actually patients, it's doctors, everybody related to a health community. And it's very interesting, they have several tools embedded on the platform where they're trying to empower the different stakeholders that are on the platform to crowdsource their ideas on how to do UK healthcare better. Third example is Civic Hacks, that is done by the We the People e-petitions website by the White House in the United States. But it's very interesting, they again created hackathons or civic hacks where they invite civil society to help them improve the website. It has now created, and not only that, other state departments of the US government have done the same. And particularly it's stimulated by releasing also data. So the open data agenda, releasing data into the let's say, civil society has produced over 100 applications on how to improve existing platforms or how to even create new platforms, improve user experience, and so on. I really encourage you to look at it. It's phenomenal what people can create, again, on a voluntary basis. The last example that I would like to use, and it's one of my favorite, it's from Montenegro. And why I like this example, because it beautifully combines a set of tools, and also it combines the offline and the online. So what happened in Montenegro, it was actually a program started by the UNDP, so donor funded, nonetheless implemented in Montenegro. And it was a government created a mobile application for citizens to actually collect transgressions in the public domain. So anything that was finable, they had a list of criteria of finable things. So illegal waste dumps, illegal parking, holes in the various transgressions. There was a list of them. And citizens could report on that via their mobile application. Within the first 6 months, around 1,500 transgressions were reported that generated a revenue of 500,000 euros for the state. What was then very interesting, the state returned half of that money back to the community and did a participatory budgeting project. So it was a very nice cycle of using first technologies to generate a certain outcome, and then using that outcome and putting it back into the community, and 15 projects came out of that at the community level, upgrading of kindergartens, old people's facilities, they reconstructed a park. So very interesting design of using both offline and online tools. So this is just a kind of a reflection. When do crowds care? The whole point of crowdsourcing is to get the crowds in there. If you don't have the crowds, you don't have crowdsourcing. And again, the research is still emerging on the impact, as was said before the previous speaker. Some of the kind of trigger points are political timing. Crowdsourcing. So timing can be an issue. It could be an impact generating factor. Issue saliency. Very important to think about the issues that one is asking the crowd to answer. Is it important? Does it resonate? Does it impact people's everyday life? Or is it something that has been cooked up by experts in a back room and we just think? And even maybe sometimes, as I think one of the speakers said, the way institutions communicate and the way citizens receive that message or the way they conceptualize things are very different. So it is for the designers of a particular tool, of a crowdsourcing tool, to think about that very deeply before launching a tool. What is it that I'm after? How do I communicate that we both get what we need out of the experience? Behavioral incentives with crowdsourcing are very interesting. It's typically competition. So there is a financial reward or just simply a reward, a recognition. Competition works very well. So US is a master of this. It has tons of crowdsourcing competitions at different in the private sector, in the state level. And then sometimes just altruism, common causes, that makes our hearts skip a beat. These are some very important reasons why people engage in crowdsourcing. It's all voluntary again. And rewards. That's something to think about also. It's not just to use the crowd, but think creatively what could be some of the rewards to give to the crowd. And there's a tendency to be cost-specific. The more specific a crowdsourcing platform or an experience can be, the better. And these are just some other do's, is focus and purpose. So when designing a tool, be it crowdsourcing or any participatory, think about it. Think before you leap. Just because somebody else has implemented a tool, it doesn't mean that it's right for you or for that particular situation. There could be one shot, one time, short term. specific issue at a particular point in time, as I said, political saliency or timing, that something is hot at the moment and one wants the input of a crowd. Or it could be something sustained, a platform that is generating kind of ongoing inputs. Spontaneous versus architected, there's a lot of kind of crowdsourced, let's say, platforms or situations where it's the civil society to civil society self-organizes, or it's super architected where it's initiating agent, being a state entity or a corporation that wants the inputs on. Then quantity versus quality, I would always go for the quality, so thinking about the design rather than churning up a lot of tools. Knowing your crowd and knowing the toolbox. And one of the interesting part is now that as more tools we have, we're becoming powerful and experiences are becoming when they're combined. So this is a trend that is coming, combination of different tools together within a platform. So one can embed a consultation, a discussion forum, then and offline, it's very encouraged to also engage offline, call to action offline. It makes things much more powerful and impactful. Incentive structures, as I said, rewards, competitions, tapping into that human kind of motivational energy. And multidisciplinary communities. This is something that is very important, I think, in a crowdsourcing context, is the question, who is your crowd? And if one wants innovation, typically it requires actually also innovators. It means kind of new skill sets, which is usually the IT community, or kind of hybrid IT activists. And it's bringing very new types of skill sets together, which makes the real successful crowdsourcing experiences very powerful, because they're adding new skill sets to the game that was not there before. So that's very important, not to be afraid to mix actually different communities together to get very innovative outcomes. And last is the blended online, offline. Highly encouraged, using different tools that are complementary of each other, and not to forget the offline as well. Just because it's technologies, it doesn't mean that it's the only thing. We still have lives outside, we still connect at different levels, and different people connect differently. So the multi-channel aspect is very, very important and should be respected. Just briefly, I work, as I said, in Ukraine. It's a very raw country in terms of a raw political setting, where it's very interesting what has happened there on a political level, big transition, socio-political transition. And we have created a research project, and I would be very happy to share. That's a presentation on its own. I'd be very glad to share it with you if you contact me on what are the user patterns of technologies in Ukraine. What are people thinking? So we conducted a public opinion survey, how people think about technologies in their private, but also in their socio-political spaces. And then we also did stakeholder prioritization of key stakeholders in the policy arena. What are they thinking in terms of the value added of technology? So this is all contained in a new report, and I'd be very glad to share it with you. Thank you.